Welcome, friends. We're going to begin in just about a minute or so. Give people a chance to get situated. Look at all of these incredible attendees. We're going to begin in just another 30 seconds, give folks a chance to get logged in. Well, I guess we can start. I'd like to wish everybody a great afternoon. My name is Emilio Dottore. I'm the executive of the Milwaukee Turners. You're attending a really important informational Zoom on the Zero Youth Corrections Youth Opportunity Community Grant. And I'm just going to give a little background, and then the others will introduce themselves and then talk a little more about the nuts and bolts of it. Historically speaking, I'm sure you all recognize that in 2019, Milwaukee County became the first U.S. county to declare racism a public health crisis. Partially connected to that, but inspired by that, Milwaukee County Zero Youth Corrections partnership was formed between the county's Department of Health and Human Services, Children, Youth, and Family Services, the Milwaukee Turners, and the Public Welfare Foundation, and also Greater Milwaukee Foundation is helping us with this too. We are all collectively committed to reducing reliance on how we do youth punishment and detention and invest in community-driven supports and services and projects and thought for how what we need to provide for our youth and family. Ideally and ultimately, we want to see zero youth corrections in Milwaukee County, if not the whole nation. Our criminal legal system in Wisconsin is not only out of control, but does everything it can to support mass incarceration, disproportionately affects Black, Brown, immigrant, and Indigenous youth. And we're very excited for this third round of grants to support this mission. So we'll probably talk a little more about this philosophically. At least you know the framework for how we have created this project and what we're going to do going forward. This is our third year. We are all incredibly excited about what we've seen from the first 2 years, and we can't wait to see what comes now for this third round. And so I pass it over.
Hi, everyone. I'm just going to ask everyone to introduce yourselves as you speak. I'm Chrissy Fung. I'm the Associate Director at the Milwaukee Turners and the Project Manager at the Turners for Zero Youth Corrections. I'm just going to talk really quickly about what you can expect during this webinar and some housekeeping stuff, and then I will turn it over to Danique to get into the meat of some of this. So really quickly, we are all here today to literally walk through the RFP documents to give potential applicants a chance to just go over both the RFP, the budget template, and what the process looks like with us. So please feel free to connect with each other in the chat. You can also use the chat or the Q&A box for questions, but we will ask that you hold your question, or we won't go over your questions until the end. All of the questions that you're submitting here today will be transcribed into our running FAQ document, which is available at milwaukeeturners.org/ZYC. That's going to be updated regularly every 1 or 2 days until the end of the application period. If you look in there now, you can see that there's already some of the questions that were asked during the previous grant announcement forum that we had. We want everyone to have access to the same information. So this is a webinar format for Zoom. Many of you may be familiar. So we will only be able to take questions via the chat or the Q&A. You won't be able to come off mute or anything like that. This webinar is going to be recorded. The recording from the grant announcement is already available on the website, and this will be available on the website by the end of the week. So that if you have folks from your organizations that are missing it, they will be able to see everything, as well as a transcription of the chat at a later date. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Danique to talk about the background of the RFP and the investment summary. I will also hopefully be screen sharing with you.
Thank you, Christy, and thank you, everybody. Again, my name is Danique Seymour. I am with the County Children, Youth, and Family Services. I am a program supervisor and have had the pleasure for the last 3 years, or just about last 3 rounds, to support this effort alongside the partnership we have established with the Milwaukee Turners, as well as Public Welfare Foundation. David Muhammad, our deputy director, was not able to be here today, so he asked me to say a few words regarding just the whole point of it all, right? And as I alluded to before, it's a partnership. This was an intentional partnership started with the Turners and PWF to really be able to focus on supporting the community, building trusting relationships, and working to remove as much red tape as possible. As you all may be familiar with, our initial amount of $400,000 is actually the same amount it costs for one youth to be at Lincoln Hills Copper Lake. So we take a second to think about that. What could we be doing with that amount of money instead of one child to be in a children's prison? And so the reality is we need to look at other opportunities to spending these funds and taking these different opportunities geared towards alternatives, so that we can really do some different things with our youth. And it also requires us being in partnership with the community. Some of you may know we've started this process off focusing on a participatory budget process. That means we need to include you all in that process, and we have done that. And we've gathered so much data, information, feedback, and response from you all, and it's helped us move towards the direction that we're going in. And what we'll be talking about, what you all probably learned the first time around, and then we'll talk a little bit more about it today, get into more meat of what you're going to be having the opportunity to apply for. And then we talked about our community roundtable and what that is going to entail. But you also know that we've had an increase with the cost of our children going to Lincoln Hill Copper Lakes. And that means that we need to work even harder to press upon the issue that spending upwards of $800,000 or more for one youth is just not going to be the answer to these issues that we face. We want to really talk about how are we going to work together, come together, work together, and find creative opportunities to change this infrastructure. And that means we need to rely on the community to help us support that. As you see on the screen right now, is going over the application in general, but it also showcases what round 1 and round 2 and what we're really trying to focus on. And we also want to make sure that you know that we're trying to move away from not just a focus on services and programs, but how do we elevate that to policy change, system change work? That means we're digging a little deeper. When we started this process, we realized we got a lot of applicants who wanted to push and promote their programs and services, which there's nothing wrong with that, right? That's awesome. And we still need folks doing that work. But now that we've noticed, we have to be elevating to work more closely on policy change, system change means we're changing things from the start of it versus responding to the end of it, if you understand what I mean by that. So it's about prevention. When we have policies and we have systems that are working together to prevent kids either going into the carceral system or deeper into the carceral system, that's what our focus is. That's what we want to be on. We're still looking for folks with creative and innovative ideas. We want you to think outside of the box. We want you to dig deeper. We want you to know that we don't look at this as like you have to fit some kind of cookie cutter box. We want you to just do what you believe has never been done before and take a chance to promote what you think is possible. And this whole process has always been about leveraging resources to be less reliant on system, for us to focus on working together in partnership within the community, and essentially supporting you the entire way. Another big chunk is removing a lot of red tape as much as possible for those, especially those applicants may not have had success with getting federal funds or even contracted with the county. There's a lot of red tape that comes with that. And this whole process for the RFP removes that red tape and allows for more opportunities to be creative and innovative and move the needle forward in different ways. And I really hope that through this process today and any questions you have continuing to come in the future about this, that you guys really reach out to us, ask us those tough questions. That's what we're here for. We want to support you. We want to be as transparent as possible. And we just thank you for being here today.
Great. Thank you, Danique. My name is Jed Oppenheim. I'm a program director for the Public Welfare Foundation. We are a national foundation that does work in 10 jurisdictions around the country. I lead our work in Milwaukee and Wisconsin. All of our work is decarcerative in nature. We are trying to reduce the imprint and the impact of mass incarceration on young people and adults. This has been a really unique partnership, County of Milwaukee and with the Milwaukee Turners, focused on doing just that and being in this unique partnership between private philanthropy, county government, and community-based abolitionist nonprofit. So we are really excited to continue this partnership and this journey in order to get to zero young people being incarcerated from Milwaukee County. I get the luck to be able to go over some of the nuts and bolts of the grant application. Many of you may have already seen this if you've been online, so I just want to briefly do this at the most high level possible. What you will see in front of you is just a brief explanation of how we intend to do the community grants this go around through the RFP. Innovative grant funds will support small community-led and or grassroots organizations working to reimagine youth justice in Milwaukee. We know that no one person or organization can reimagine or transform the entire system on their own. And we are most interested in funding strategies, as Danique said, that could connect the direct service organizing and coalition building that often have a better chance of moving some of the broader systems change work. We're particularly interested in initiatives that are working to upend or transform structures, customs, mindsets, power dynamics, and policies through collaboration. We talk a lot about systems change. Last year, I gave the example of getting school police out of Milwaukee public schools, really led by a great community partner, LIT, in terms of working around school disciplinary issues and what it means to have police on campuses. We know that, it might be, no part of us thinks that it's going to be some massive broad thing that any one organization can do. There's lots of pieces of the justice system that need to be changed. Think about something like fines and fees and how that impacts children, families, young people who aren't even legally eligible oftentimes to work, are given fines and fees through the court system. And so that sets them up for failure, right? So like these little pieces account for something much larger than just any one specific direct service responding to the need from those young people and their families, whatever the issue is within the court system. Another example is, youth diversion, right? Diverting young people from the court system or even from law enforcement, right? Like there's opportunities to do that. And that doesn't mean being necessarily the service provider, but maybe it means getting the youth court to more likely use community-based alternatives than to react to a carceral setting, right? It would be too heavy of a resource for us to be able to fund every specific direct service, doing that for every child. But if we could change the system to be more responsive, then that could better equate to less young people being incarcerated. This go round with the $400,000, we'll be granting up to 3 organizations this year. Usually it's been 2. We don't know if it'll be 3 organizations. We're just keeping that open. Similar to the last couple of years, we'll only be able to maximize at $200,000 per grant. And the grant time, just so you're very clear, is 18 months. It is not a 12-month grant. It is an 18 months. So if you think about it, if you're applying for $150,000 or $200,000, that's over 18 months. we will be managing these grants collaboratively, and we are hoping to set you up for success. So there'll be opportunities, regular opportunities to check in with us to get other kind of support through the duration of the grant. So we're not just making the grant and then walking away. We're going to make the grant and then we're going to work with you. Eligibility, only nonprofit organizations are eligible to apply. And these might also be collaboratives or coalitions, but it's the nonprofit that has to apply, and that's a 501c3 with your IRS tax status. If you could scroll down, Chris, it would be great. Thank you. For-profit organizations are not eligible to be the applicant. It does not mean that they can't be part of some collaborative application. But it is the nonprofit that needs to be the lead applicant. We also want to be very clear on this point around law enforcement. Law enforcement entities, law enforcement adjacent entities, so you think about like the security apparatus or surveillance technology folks, and government entities are not eligible for funding under this award. And no funds within an application, once you do your budget, should be going to any of these entities. For the selection process, all proposals will be screened for eligibility that meet the criteria bulleted in the box will be reviewed and scored by Zero Youth Corrections committee members using a standardized rubric. And then based on these scores, the finalists will be identified and interviewed which will be scheduled with each finalist early in 2025. The screening criteria is listed below. Meets organizational criteria, lead organization is a nonprofit, a complete proposal is submitted, and the project is within the scope outlined in the RFP. Priority selection. I want to be clear, these are priorities. This does not mean that if you do not fit one of these, you should not apply. It just means that through the scoring of the rubric, additional points will be given for organizations that meet these specific standards or priorities. So proposing that the work is tailored to support special populations, including youth charged with violent offenses, girls, and youth who identify as LGBTQIA. The organization is led by Black, Brown, immigrant, and/or Indigenous people. It is specifically supporting Black, Brown, immigrant, and/or Indigenous young people who are directly system impacted. And you know, sometimes it gets complicated because we think of at risk as, oh, this is a great category, but is there risk based on the fact that they actually have already had contact with law enforcement and or the court? So really want to be thinking about what does system impacted mean. Leadership and program staff who are directly or indirectly impacted by the criminal legal system. Groups who have not received prior children, youth, and family services funding from the county for their work. Organizations with budgets under $1 million, and organizations who are partnering with one or more other organizations or agencies to work collaboratively towards a shared goal. Again, no single entity is going to solve the issue of decarcerating young people. And so we really want to encourage work being done collaboratively here. For reporting, for the fund and the reporting, because we're building this community table adjacent to the RFP process, we are requiring that when you do your budget, that $10,000 will go towards your activity and participation at the community table simultaneously. Maybe Chrissy or Danique to talk a little bit further about the community table because I didn't talk about it on the top. Funds can be used for hiring additional staff. Oftentimes grant makers say, don't use your money for staff. We are perfectly fine with you using money for staff. We understand that it takes people to get the job done. You can support sub-grants to other partners. So if you are working in some kind of collaboration, you should feel free through your grant to make sub-grants to other entities. But again, those cannot in our other government organizations. You can purchase program supplies, compensate young people or families for their time, pay for office management, support travel-related expenses, and programming. Funds cannot be used, we have to be very clear about this. funds cannot be used for lobbying or C4 activities. So that might be electoral politics, it might be candidate related activities, policies that you're saying you're in for or against, and that gets a little bit complicated to say, well, how can we do policy advocacy if we can't talk about specific policies? That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about specific legislative bills, maybe things that might be in front of the city council or the county government, where you're saying we want to vote no on bill, title, number, et cetera, et cetera. And that's very different than saying we don't think that there should be, and we have resources linked here as well for better information on how to understand that. Reporting expectations: if you're awarded the grant, you'll be expected to meet on either a more quarterly basis. We've kind of changed that over time, and so we're not 100% certain how that will look for a monthly or a quarterly basis. You will have to do regular budget reports, and we'll get to the, and then we will do regular check-ins because we want to be able to troubleshoot with you and the folks that you're working with on the initiative. And I think that's the end of this part. Yep. So I want to go back to the community table just really briefly for context. So doubled between the county and between Public Welfare Foundation, doubling the dollars going in. Half the dollars will continue to go RFP, and we've just talked about. And then the other half is going to go through the Milwaukee Turners to build a community table that is going to be around political education, around youth justice issues, understanding the landscape, understanding the data. What are policies impacting young people? What are some of the practices that are happening that could be changed or more invested on, et cetera, et cetera. Maybe there's a narrative change aspect to this. Like, how do we push back against the negative racist narratives that are out there, particularly right now around Black and brown young people being super predators in Milwaukee and Milwaukee County? How do we build a collective voice on these? And so that's why we're also asking for the people who receive the RFP money to use some of that money to participate at the community table. The community table will also sub-grant to other entities, and there's more information on that to come later. We won't be able to answer any like too specific questions about it right now, as that gets fleshed out. And for those of you who came to the community meeting a couple of weeks ago, there was also some information provided there, and that's on the website, as Chrissy mentioned. I think the next thing is the budget template, right, Chrissy?
Yes. I'm going to stop sharing the RFP and share the budget template now.
I get all the exciting parts of this. Now I get to talk about the budget template. Thank you for that, Chrissy. If you could scroll down just a little bit, please. So this is just a template. This does not mean you have to use this template when you submit your budget, but this is to give you a sense of what we'll be looking for. If you're applying for a grant from this project through this RFP, if you're applying for $200,000, that might not be the total amount of dollars that you're intending to spend on this particular project. Maybe it's $300,000 and you have $100,000 that maybe you've been lucky enough to be able to raise elsewhere that you're adding this onto. So what we're trying to get at is what we're trying to get to is what's that both overall project budget, and then what are you using the RFP dollars for? And so if you see the bottom half, for simplicity, even though it's also like super complicated sometimes, we've divided it up by 6-month increments since it's a 18-month grant. So just to think about like, oh, how would we spend in these trimesters of the grant, so to speak. You'll see, you could use salary and benefit dollars here. You could use consultants, contractors, other direct costs if you're using travel dollars, et cetera. What we just want to be able to know is generally how this budget, like aligns to what you're proposing. Like if we're seeing things in the budget that aren't aligned to what you're putting in your narrative, I'm sure that'll show up through the scoring on the rubric of what the people who will be reviewing the grants will be seeing. They'll be looking at this. They'll be looking at your narrative. If you're talking about, oh yeah, we're working on this thing, and we're going to need all these young people and families to, you know, be showing up and showing out around this particular policy issue, and then like you don't have anything on your budget about travel costs or maybe youth stipends or like a photographer or whatever, videographer for an event, like we'd be like, we don't really know what's going on. Also, if you're using this for staff dollars, for example, if you're using this for staff dollars and, you know, a reviewer might look at it and be like, oh, they're not paying their staff at like a living wage or whatever it might be, and, you know, they're expecting all this work. Those are also the kind of things that folks might question. But again, we understand that this is just one segment of your overall budget, and so it might just need a little bit of explaining. So this is the budget template. Again, you have to use this specific budget template, but it's there for you. The link is within the application, and so if you want to use it, you should. You delete the things that were already put in there from the template and just go ahead and use it. All on my part.
Okay, great. Thank you, Jed. And yeah, like they said in the chat, the link to the budget document and all of the other documents that you need are in the application. For those of you who are raising your hands, we're not able to take questions or bring people off mute, but we are able to take questions in the chat or in the Q&A box. So I'm going to stop sharing the budget template and go back to the RFP just to show a couple of things at the bottom. As Jed said, the budget template is just a template. So if you have a different budget template that you prefer to use, as long as you're clearly communicating what you're spending the money on, then that is okay. I would recommend either way that you take a look at this to see what types of things that we're asking for, although this is a fairly standard template. But the reason that we do the 6-month increments is due to the 18-month duration of the grant, since a lot of grants are just for a year. One thing that I will tell you that we do look closely at is we do look closely to make sure that you're communicating that you're paying your staff in a way that shows that you value them. Those are the folks that are doing the work. I know that there's a lot of grants where grantors seem to be looking for you to be paying people the minimum amount of money. And that is not what this grant is about. We're definitely about showing that you're compensating people fairly and competitively for their lived expertise. So with that, I'm going to share the RFP again. Okay. So now I have so many screens. So down here is just a list of what is going to be shown in the RFP submission form. So this year it's a little bit different than in prior years. This is a Google form. So because the questions are required, when you go to fill it out, you won't be able to advance to the next screen until you have filled out the questions on the first part of the screen. So for that reason, we've included the information that you will be required to submit in a list format here so that you know ahead of time what you'll need to have together. A lot of this is basic organization information and project contact information. I do want to highlight that we are using the same conflict of interest process as last year. So that's a dual conflict of interest check. That means that the ZYC advisory board members, who are a group of folks, including the people that you see on the screen here now and some folks in the audience, they're folks who have been directly impacted by the system, those with lived expertise, as well as those working on youth justice. We have a mixture of folks that have and have not evaluated grants before, which I think is important because everyone brings a different perspective to the table, although everyone's going to go through the same training as part of that process. And then as part of the advisory board process, once all the applications are in, the advisory board members will be asked to look at everyone's organization and names that are on the application and state whether they have a conflict of interest. And then you, as the potential applicant, will also need to go through a list of the advisory board members and state whether you have a conflict of interest. So to be clear, what we mean by conflict of interest is not just that you know someone or that you've bumped into them at a youth justice meeting somewhere in Milwaukee. We know that Milwaukee is called Smallwaukee for a reason. So it's okay that you know somebody. But if, for example, you have a fiscal relationship with them, you are business partners with them on a different venture, if you are, they are sitting on your board, for example, we do state that advisory board members are not eligible, or folks are not eligible to be on the advisory board if they are staff of an organization that is applying, or if they're involved in the grants application, such as an independent contractor that would be hired to help grants. So those folks would not be eligible to be on the advisory board at all. But other than that, what we do is we just do not have folks that have a conflict of interest evaluating those specific grants. If you have more questions about that, I'm sure that questions will certainly come up in the FAQ later. And then also, if you are not sure whether something constitutes a conflict of interest, it's fine to list the person's name who's on the advisory board and then just explain your relationship. And in general, we just play it safe and don't necessarily, we have a pretty robust advisory board, so we don't necessarily have to pair those people with those applications. As a reminder, though, you won't be disqualified from applying to the grant on the basis of affiliation with members of the advisory committee. So there will probably be a lot of you who have been working in this space for a long time who know a lot of folks on the advisory board, and that's perfectly normal, and you don't need to be worried about that. So then the next link that you see here is the budget template that Jed went over. And then for your proposed project summary, like the previous two rounds, we are accepting the project summaries in writing or in video. So if you're submitting a video, it needs to specifically address each question and can be up to 10 minutes long. We are not looking for professional editing and videography. That's fine if you have that, that's super cool, but that's not the way that we're looking at this. So if you just shoot something on an iPhone, but it answers all the questions, that's completely okay. We're definitely assessing your application on the content of the answers alone. So for that reason, you want to make sure that you're taking a close look at the questions and making sure you're answering them as thoroughly as you would if they were in writing. And for that project summary, we're looking for an overview of the work that you're doing, the total amount of funding you're requesting, the goals of the project, the steps that you need to take to achieve the project goal. And then we're breaking things down a little bit to try and get folks closer to those, to that systems change lens that we've been talking about. So we're also looking for how the project will inform and or bring transformational change in policies, processes, institutions, or power structures that prevent young people from becoming impacted or recidivated into the criminal legal system, and or work to address root causes of racialized outcomes and inequitable systems. So again, we are not looking for your application with potentially up to $200,000 in funding to solve the entire system here. We're looking for, what is your systems change lens? What small part of the system are you looking to sort of attack or address that would be able to meet those requirements and look towards transformational change? We're also looking for whether and how the proposed project will engage young people and their families directly impacted by the criminal legal system. And then to the point of getting you closer to those systems change lens, thought exercise, we've included this round a couple of additional questions. So we're looking for you to explain one structural or systemic barrier that could be changed to make it easier to do your job, make your work more impactful, or get Milwaukee County closer to a reality of zero youth corrections. We're also looking for what support or resources you would need to address the barrier. We're looking for that answer not to just be more funding, although that is a piece of what this grant attempts to address. We're looking for a different answer on that, since everybody would answer more funding, so would I. And then we're also looking for what you would most hope to learn, experience, or take away from your engagement with the community table. So you can see this is in bold, and the deadline is very bold at the top of the RFP. Mark it on your calendars. All of the application materials must be submitted by December 20th. Please make sure that you are looking to submit early if you're concerned that you may have any technical difficulties or issues with the Google form. In the previous rounds, we've had folks really submitting up until the deadline. And so I definitely encourage you to make sure that you have all your application materials together a little bit ahead of time to ensure that you don't run into that barrier. And then at the bottom, you see here, this is just a note about the screenings that applicants would have to be able to make sure that they quote unquote pass before they're selected. So the Greater Milwaukee Foundation is our funding partner in this work, and they will be doing this due diligence process through the screenings. It's a nonprofit status screening, an ethics and anti-hate screening, and a financial health screening. If you don't have a GuideStar profile, you can share your EIN and your most recent 990. If you have particular questions, you can submit those to ZYC@MilwaukeeTurners.org if we don't end up getting to your organization specific question during the question and answer session that we'll have just in a minute. I think we'll try to focus on more general questions first and then get to if folks have organization highly specific questions. So that is the end of the RFP itself. I'm going to stop screen sharing. And then we are going to get into some questions. I don't see anything in the Q&A box, but I believe there are some questions in the chat.
Yeah, I've been responding to some Chrissy in the Q&A chat, and so maybe I could just open those up and go over them out loud really quickly if folks haven't seen it.
Yeah, that sounds great.
So one question was, can CYFS providers apply? Yes, but per the grant application, you'll see who, as a priority, those who have not received prior CYFS funding to support their work. So you just will not get some points because the priority list, there's 6 or 7 bullets. Those are additional, I think it's half points for each of those. And if you kind of meet those priorities, so you just wouldn't get that particular point. Next question if in coalition with an org, which org past finances do we choose to use within this budget template? It should be the lead applicant organization. Then there was a question about receiving funding from HIDTA to provide substance misuse prevention services. The activities are not enforcement related, but will that partnership disqualify us? We'll have to have further conversations. What we said is, if you have independent relationships with law enforcement or adjacent or government outside of this request, and for other work that is clearly separate, it shouldn't be an issue, but we probably want to talk about that, and we'll get back to you through the FAQ. And then this last question was similar to the first question. So as a CYFS provider, would you lose if you've only received ZYC grants? You wouldn't lose those points, or you wouldn't not get those points if you've received ZYC funding before.
Okay, and just to clarify on, we've gotten a couple questions over email about whether a for-profit can apply. So you can apply as long as you have a 501c3 that can meet and pass the screenings necessary, then that would be completely allowable. And then we've been also getting a lot of questions surrounding the concept of law enforcement adjacent. So to be clear, the funding, the dollars from this grant cannot be used to fund law enforcement or law enforcement adjacent entities. That doesn't preclude an organization that has some separate work with law enforcement. However, we would certainly be looking for your program to not be reinvesting in reliance in the system, right? So the purpose of these particular dollars is to get away from reliance on punishment-focused systems and reimagine something different that is putting resources into the community. So hopefully that helps. Are there any other questions in the chat?
Yes, there's a question about the scoring rubric being made public prior to the application deadline. Yes. Chris, is the rubric online or going to be online?
I don't believe that it is. Sorry, I'm not seeing that question. Oh, is it in the Q&A?
It's a Q&A, yep.
I know that we'll at least be sharing the principles that we're doing the evaluation based on. Jed and Denise, you can correct me if I'm wrong about the full rubric.
Yeah, I mean yes. So we are going to have all that stuff posted online, and it'll show kind of like the overarching. Christine, it might be helpful if you could. Are you able to pull that up, the rubric, so we could show it?
I don't have a downloaded version.
Could show you kind of the
general. To screen share it really quickly.
So, for example, in the application where it has the 7 or 8 priority areas, like those are half point pieces. Then there's 3 sections of scoring that's around is it abolition oriented? Is it systems oriented? Is the review of it is the budget aligned with the proposal? We're just looking for the specific language so that.
Sorry, I'm trying to pull it up. I see a question in the chat about when the RFP will be made available. It is available. It's at milwaukeeturners.org/ZYC. And so the principles for the rubric that we're looking for the proposal to be equitable. So we're looking at whether it addresses the root causes of racial and ethnic disparities that increase the likelihood of criminal legal system involvement for Black, Brown, immigrant, and/or Indigenous young people in Milwaukee County. Is the proposed project asset-based and inclusive of communities, particularly young people and their families, most impacted by the issue in decision-making? We are also looking at the principle of actionable. So is the proposed project practical and executable as written? Does the team have the skills, capacity, knowledge, or lived experience to implement the proposed strategy? Or do they have a plan to build those skills or acquire strategic partners? We're also very much looking at the fact that the grant period is 18 months. So if you submit a program that would, that it feels to reviewers would take much longer than 18 months to execute, that's something that would score lower on actionability. We're looking for feasibility. So is the proposed budget feasible and well aligned with the proposed project? Do they reflect a realistic understanding of the costs and activities needed to implement the proposed work? It should be clear from your application that no ZYC funds are going to law enforcement adjacent, or other government agencies. And so on that note, that is just because we, with these particular dollars, like I was saying before, we're looking for folks to be investing and reinvesting outside of the system. And then we're looking for, as Jed was saying, the principles of, we're looking for abolitionist principles, transformativity. And Jed, what was the third thing you just? I closed my screen. Can y'all hear me or am I frozen?
We can hear you fine, friend.
Okay, so we'll be sharing not the full rubric, but the principles that we're looking at when we're assessing.
Many of which are also outlined in the RFP. And there's an example of that shared in the chat from Yante.
And then
again,
someone
just
asked
to
in the chat
reiterate,
when, oh, sorry, go ahead.
and one of the things to reiterate is the emphasis on systems change, policy change, as opposed to direct service. It seems to be an obstacle in understanding because of our immediate need to provide services to individuals who need that direct service. We're asking folks to think and imagine upstream a little further on how to change the system that is creating this impact for our young people, the criminal legal system. And then the other question was, when is this due? And it's due December 20th. Celebrate the solstice with a successfully submitted RFP.
Like the top snow.
Chrissy, are you talking to the group or
Chrissy's.
I'm talking to the ghosts. I see a question. What is the maximum cost per participant? So I guess, would you mind clarifying in another, just you can type it in the chat or another Q&A. What I'm assuming that you mean is what is the maximum amount of money that you are allowed to spend per program participant? And we don't have a specific number for that. An important part of this grant is that we're not necessarily looking for you to say, I guarantee that I can serve 1,000 young people and make sure that 100% of the 1,000 young people do not, quote unquote, recidivate. That's really not the intention behind the spirit behind this grant. So I think that it's important to think through, if you're coming from a direct service background, it's important to think through the systems change lens that we're looking at. So using your experience, which is super important with all of that direct service, to think about what challenges and barriers that the system itself is putting forward for you that you think could be addressed in this grant period. Okay, you're saying that is correct. Okay, great. Yeah, and so just a little bit more on the principles in the rubric. Again, the concept of that we're looking for something that is transformative. So something that's designed to bring transformational change in policies, processes, institutions, or power structures that prevent young people from becoming impacted or recidivated into the criminal legal system. We're looking for it to be abolitionist. So is the goal of the project aligned with ZYC's long-term vision of zero youth incarceration? Would it help reduce reliance on law enforcement, jails, and prisons, and build capacity or expand community-based services, supports, and opportunities for youth impacted by or at risk of being impacted by the criminal legal system? And there is a link in the RFP itself to kind of a more robust definition or way to think through the concept of systems change. And I definitely recommend that folks take a good look at that link.
I think one of the things that we get caught up on is this might be maybe an unpopular way to frame this, but we get caught up. What we're trying to say is we're not trying to fix the child. The child might absolutely need lots of supports, need all the wraparound services, need all the family supports, economic opportunities, housing opportunities, et cetera, et cetera. We are trying to change the system that impacts that child to create that condition. And so if you're thinking, oh, I want to do a thing that's going to like fix these kids, that's super important work, but that's not necessarily what we're looking for through this opportunity.
And there is another question that I guess we somewhat answered, but could we use this funding on sustainable cultural campaign shifting and direct service work like creation of youth boards? That is something that has been funded in previous rounds of this grant. There is absolutely, sorry, hold on one second. One of my most beloved board members is here crashing the party. We certainly do allow in the budget. We try to be it's not completely unrestricted, but we try to be as unrestrictive as possible. And so something like direct payments to members of a youth board would certainly be acceptable. And someone asked again, will the rubric be shared? The full rubric will not be shared. We will share the principles that we're looking at when we're looking at your application. And that will be available at milwaukeeturners.org/ZYC. Another question, transportation is mentioned. Yes, you certainly can put lines in your budget for transportation. So again, a lot of the stuff that many grants that you may have applied for don't allow, such as transportation, feeding people, direct payments to young people who are doing the work. All of that stuff is allowable. The things that are not allowable are listed pretty clearly, but again, it's fine to ask specific questions because I think it is, in our experience, at least relatively uncommon for dollars like this to be as unrestrictive as they are in this grant. I guess if we're not seeing any more questions, we can move to closing. Last call for questions, y'all. You can also still submit questions after this to ZYC@milwaukeeturners.org. And I'll type that in the chat. And then the questions that were asked here today, as well as the questions that you submit through email, we will share all the answers in the FAQ document available at milwaukeeturners.org/ZYC so that everyone has access to the same information. One more question that I got over email also is about taking individual meetings with advisory board members. We do not have the capacity to meet individually with potential applicants. And so in the interest of fairness, we're not able to offer that to certain applicants and not others. So we do ask that you just send your questions through ZYC@milwaukeeturners.org. If you need to send a video question because you need to make a longer explanation, that's fine too. We're happy to transcribe that for you. And I'm seeing a couple more questions now. How does the community table work? So we're intentionally not talking too much about the community table during this RFP walkthrough session because we don't want folks to get confused. There is an interest form that will also be available at milwaukeeturners.org/ZYC. But we are not at the stage of selecting the folks that will be at the community table right now, as we're focusing on the RFP work. With the caveat that the folks that are selected for this grant process are required to be a part of the community table. And then Jed, did you want to address the application support?
Yeah, I was just starting to write an answer in there. I think you should send your questions to the ZYC email. If you have a question it's appropriate to respond to. If it's like an opinion on, do you think this idea will fly or not? That could potentially just conflict people out, and we wouldn't want to do that from this process. Because then if I have an opinion about it and I'm like, oh, this is the most amazing thing in the world, then I probably can't be a part of the review process because then I'm biased about it. But if it's a question of like, how do I submit something? What paper forms? I can't find the information about that. Absolutely. Please send us those types of questions.
Okay, and then we had a final question about whether we'll be sending a copy of the recording out. The recording will not be sent out automatically, but it will be available at milwaukeeturners.org/ZYC. Sorry to sound like a broken record. Hopefully you dream about this URL tonight. So with that, I think that's the last of the questions that I see here. So I just want to thank you all for spending your time with us here today. Again, please feel free. The recording should be up, if not later today, then by tomorrow, so that you can share that out with folks at your organization or other folks that you may be in coalition with in applying for this grant. The recording of the grant announcement as well as the PowerPoint that was shared that day are already up at milwaukeeturners.org/ZYC. Want to thank my colleagues on the core team, Danique and Jed, Emilio, who appears to be a Vespa as well. I think he secretly has someone standing over his shoulder. So that's completely fair. And then all of you who are dedicated to doing youth justice work in Milwaukee. As a reminder, the ultimate goal of this program is in the name. It is zero youth corrections. That is the long-term goal that we are all working towards. And so that's the long-term goal that we want to see come through in your application. Again, we will share the principles behind the rubric in the shared folder that is linked on the website. If you have any issues with accessing, I think everything is available in PDF format except for the budget template, which is in Excel format. So if you have issues with formatting, you can contact us and we can send you something in a different format. Please remember to submit your completed grant applications to ZYC through the form that is linked at the website. By 11:59 p.m. on December 20th. Again, I highly encourage you to put your materials together beforehand, just in case you come up against any internet or other technical difficulties. And then again, you can send questions to ZYC@milwaukeeturners.org. Please do not approach members of the advisory board with your questions individually, as I have put an air tag on all of them and a recording device, and I'm making sure that they're not giving you private answers. Anything that anyone else would like to say in closing? All right, y'all. Well, thanks for spending your belated lunch hour with us. And good luck on your applications.